right, good morning, Title I coordinators. Thank you for joining us for our September webinar. For those of you who are new to Title I, my name is Erin Suddeth, and I'm the branch manager of the Title I Part A Support and Improvement branch here at KDE. And I have my colleague with me who can introduce himself.
Hi, I'm David Malonte, one of the assistant directors in the Division of School and Program Improvement.
All right, so before we get started, I think everybody's already done this, but if you're joining us through Teams, just check the upper right-hand side of your Teams window there and make sure that you've got your camera off and your microphone muted. That just allows everybody to focus on the presentation today. And of course, we will have time at the end for questions, so if you're on Teams, you can put those in the chat or use the raise hand feature. You can also just send those to me via email at erin.suddeth@education.ky.gov. And as always, we are recording this webinar and it should be posted on the website either later today or tomorrow. The August webinar recording is already up on the web page, and other than our usual announcements and reminders and things, we had some information about the carryover limitation and waiver, some basic FY26 GMAP reminders for everybody working on their applications. And the bulk of the meeting, we heard from Marcia Van Hook, who provided a lot of really great information about the new Parent and Family Connection Hub that is up and running. So if you weren't able to join, be sure to go back and watch that recording to hear that useful information. Today, we're going to have our usual, as always, reminders and announcements, and then I'm going to share a really exciting new resource with everyone, an online course, and then the bulk of the meeting is going to be about the comparability report. So our announcements and reminders, if you are going to need to request a carryover waiver for school year 24-25 funds, that deadline is fast approaching. You need to do that no later than September 30th. And you do that by just emailing David, and that email needs to say that you're requesting the waiver for those funds, the reason that you have more than 15% that you're carrying over, and a brief description of a plan for how you're going to use those funds effectively. And of course, we have our Title I carryover information document on our webpage with lots more additional information about carryover and all of those requirements. Districts who are interested in opting in to use the Title I Next documentation storage platform for the first time need to complete the Title I Next information form by October 1st. Several of you have already done that. I also want to say to everyone who is already using Title I Next that the school year 25-26 folders are now available in the platform. If you've already opted in, you should be able to access those. And for our districts that were using Title I Next last year and have decided to not continue using that for this year, we also ask that you complete this information form just to indicate that you would like to opt out for this year. And this isn't on the slide, but I did get a reminder from our budget and finance branch yesterday. Don't forget that if you ever have a question about the status of your GMAP application, first of all, you can always go into GMAP and you can look at the consolidated checklist and see which programs have been able to complete their review and provide any feedback. And you can always also email the KDE GMAP help email address. That is kdegmap@education.ky.gov, and you can send any questions or anything to that email address. All right, we kind of just talked about this, but looking at the obligation of last year's funds, so we are at the end of that first 15-month period. So as I mentioned, by September 30th, you should have at least 85% of last year's funds obligated. If you are not going to have that obligated, you do need to go ahead and follow those instructions to request the carryover waiver as I just shared. We do have 3 open projects right now, and other than that deadline to request the carryover waiver, I don't think we have any deadlines that are fast approaching at the moment, but you do always want to keep these in mind and kind of keep an eye on your progress for all of the open projects. Our September Title I newsletter is up on our webpage. A lot of great information in here. So we had an announcement about the comparability report, which we'll be talking about in a minute. Information on reviewing GMAP application feedback, helping you take care of any issues that have been identified. We had an article about communication folders and their allowability in Kentucky. There was an ESEA Now article that came out a few weeks ago talking about being able to purchase those communication or take home folders with parent and family engagement funds, and that is not something that we in Kentucky allow. So that article has a little bit of an explanation. Some states may allow that, but we do not. There's also information about family-friendly district certification opportunities. A few months ago, we heard about the family-friendly schools process. This would be for a district-wide process. Carryover waiver announcement, of course. The principal's perspective article is talking about the compacts at conferences and training your teachers on how to do that. And we've said this multiple times. That is a very common monitoring finding at the school level, that those compacts aren't being discussed the way they should be. So I highly recommend you share that article and go over it with your Title I principals. And we are currently accepting applications for diagnostic review team members. Other than that, we just had our recurring reminders, year at a glance, things like that. If you or anyone in the district, Title I building principals, for example, are not currently receiving the newsletter emails, just let me know and I can add you or anyone else to that subscriber list. Sorry about that. I'm not going to read through all of our suggested tasks for September, but I do want to touch on a couple of these because they do relate to some of our more common monitoring findings, especially at the school level with parent and family engagement. So making sure that all of the schools have had their annual meetings, shared that Title I information with parents. We do recommend that those be conducted by the end of October, but I know a lot of you, your schools pair those like with open house, so they've probably already occurred, but you want to make sure you have that documentation. We also want to make sure that all of the different required documents have been shared with parents: district parent and family engagement policy, school parent and family engagement policy and compact, as well as things like the testing transparency information. Remember, some of that has to be posted on the web page, not just shared in a letter or printed in a handbook or something, as well as the right to request teacher qualifications. So those are the big ones that we tend to run into when we're monitoring, but take some time and review all of these suggested tasks for September when you can. All right, so our first piece of new information is about the Kentucky Learning Hub, and you may have heard about that recently, but for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it is KDE's new one-stop shop for high-quality professional learning opportunities, and this is for all Kentucky educators, certified and classified. You can log into the hub just using your district email address and your district password. We do have some courses available now, and I know that a number of additional courses are currently being developed and added to the platform. So these courses are content focused, they're standards aligned, and they are designed specifically for adult learners. If you're not super familiar with the hub and you want to learn some more information, I've got a link to their promotional video as well as the August 12th superintendent's webcast where that platform was discussed a little more in detail. And if you want to skip right to the Learning Hub section of that webcast, it's around the 15-minute mark. So that brings me to my new resource for us. So I'm very excited to announce that we have a Title I Part A for Schools course that is now available in the Kentucky Learning Hub. So this course is completely self-paced and it's designed with principals of Title I schools and maybe other school staff working with the Title I program. Maybe there's a specific teacher who helps with parent and family engagement or an assistant principal or something like that in mind. So as I was developing this course, I tried to really focus on what people in Title I schools need to know and not include the stuff that doesn't really apply to them. So for example, there's not a lot of information in there about the comparability report because that's something that you do at the district level. The schools don't really need to know the nitty-gritty details about that. There are 5 modules within the course. So there's Title I Basics. That's a very general overview of Title I-A, specifically, again, focusing on things that the school level staff need to know, like eligibility, allowability, things like that. The next 3 sections all align with the school level monitoring checklist. So we have needs assessment, school program design and effectiveness, and parent and family engagement. And then that last module is shorter than the others, and it's just got some information and tips on how to effectively document program compliance. And a lot of those are going to be things that you all have heard me share before. The modules are broken up into manageable portions and pages, and the content is presented through a couple means. We've got just standard text and then some short videos as well. The first 4 modules also include quizzes. I think one of them has 10 questions, and I think all the others just have 5. And then once all 5 of those modules have been completed, a certificate of completion is emailed to participants. And I am in the process of creating a Title I Part A for districts course as well. That's going to be a lot more in-depth and really beneficial for our new coordinators, but also our coordinators who've been around for a while and maybe need some refreshers. So I'll let you know when that becomes available, and if there's anything that you think should be maybe included in that course, feel free to share that with me. So in order to enroll in the course, you're just going to visit the Kentucky Learning Hub course catalog that's linked on this presentation and look for the Title I Part A for Schools course listing. And that is the image there on the left. So you'll click on that listing and then it'll take you to this image on the right and you just click on the enroll button. So it should kind of stand out because it's yellow. I'm not sure why it's yellow, but it is. So I encourage you to enroll in this course to just learn more about it, share it with the others in your district who will benefit from the information. And at the end, there is a brief anonymous survey. Please, if you do the course, also complete that survey and let me know your thoughts on the course. You can also just send those directly to me if you want as well. Just like our webinars, our newsletters, all of our resources, we want to make sure that these online courses meet your needs. They're giving you everything that you need to know. Right, so our main topic for today is the comparability report. And this requirement comes out of Section 1118C of the Every Student Succeeds Act. And that section requires districts to demonstrate that the services provided in Title I served schools are comparable to those provided in non-Title I schools prior to spending Title I funds. So services funded through state and local funds should be comparable between Title I and non-Title I schools. And then within a grade span, if all of the schools are being served by Title I, we're comparing our higher poverty Title I schools to our lower poverty Title I schools to check for that same comparability. So in Kentucky, districts complete this comparability report every October and upload that into the GMAP district document library for approval. It's always due on or around November 1. This year, November 1st is, I think, a Saturday, so it is going to be due on November 3rd. We can calculate comparability one of 2 ways, and the majority of our districts use the student to staff ratio method, and they save the salary comparison option in the event that they can't demonstrate comparability through those student to staff ratios. So all districts must submit the comparability report in GMAP, but we do have some districts that are not required to actually calculate comparability because they meet some of these exclusions. So for our districts with only one school period or only one school per grade span, there's nothing to compare to, so you don't have to calculate comparability. And then for our other districts, if you have a particular grade span where none of your schools are served by Title I, you don't have to calculate comparability. I know a lot of our districts don't serve any of their high schools, so you're not going to have to calculate it for them. So these districts that are not required to calculate comparability, you're going to complete the very first page of the workbook, which is just kind of some basic information about the district, and then you are done. We do have several resources to support you in completing that report. We'll talk about where to download the actual report workbook on the next slide, but the available resources include the checklist, which allows you to see what your KDE consultant uses to review and approve your report. And we also have a guide with a lot of screenshots and detail, a training video that walks you through actually completing that report. The video is about 25 minutes long. It may be beneficial to have your comparability report workbook open in one screen and the video or the guide open on another screen so you can just pause and refer back to those resources as needed. So the 25-26 comparability report template is available in the GMAP district document library. So when you go to the library, you'll find where it says Title I comparability report, and I've got some screenshots on the next slide to show you this. You're going to click on Edit Documents, and then click on the document template link, and it will download the Excel spreadsheet for you. This is the same place where you're going to come to upload the completed comparability report. We do ask that you try to save that file with the following naming convention. This just makes it easier for us as all of our consultants are reviewing, 10 to 20 comparability reports. We put the school year 2025-26, then the district name and the abbreviation CompRep. So 2025-2026 Franklin County CompRep. And be sure that you are using the template for the current school year. We do update the workbook every year just to make sure that the dates are correct. So you want to make sure that you're using the right one. Also, we do need you to save this file as an Excel document, not a Google Sheets or a PDF or anything like that. It does need to be in Excel. And finally, do not complete the checklist tab of the workbook. That's going to be the very last tab. And this is what your KDE consultant uses when they're reviewing and approving your report. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, there is a PDF copy of that checklist on the Title I webpage that you can use as a reference, but you're going to want to leave this page of the spreadsheet blank. And as I said, these are just some screenshots from the GMAP district document library. So over on the left-hand side, you can see where you'll select 2026 from the root folders menu, then click search folders, and then expand that Title I comparability report line item. That's where you'll see that edit documents link that I have highlighted. And then you will go to the update documents and links page, and you'll see I've highlighted the link where you download that report template. So some other comparability report reminders, and I've linked the guide on this page as well, and I've also got some page references for where you'll find these. Up first is as soon as the file opens, it should ask you at the top if you want to enable macros. You're going to click yes on that. This just enables the various functions and equations that are built into the report to make it work properly. So if you don't click the enable macros button when prompted, sometimes some of those behind the scene formulas and formatting may not work appropriately. Next reminder is don't start on the report too early. So there's a specific window for completing comparability, and that is between the last day of the second month of the school year and October 31st. And a month of school is classified as 20 teaching days. So for the majority of our districts, that means the window is going to be September 30th through October 31st. So that means that you need to wait until at least Monday at the earliest to start your report. Right, our next reminder is about grouping schools correctly by both grade level and size. So on that first page, it's got kind of the three standard grade levels programmed in K through 5, 6 through 8, 9 through 12. If that's not what your district looks like, you can go in and edit those and make it match, if you have K6 or K8 or whatever. So you can want to group those together. If your district doesn't have any schools with overlapping grade spans, then grouping by grade is super straightforward. When there is overlap, you need to look at which groups share the most grade levels in common. For example, let's say that a district has some K5 schools and some 6-8 schools, and then they have one school that's K6. We're going to group that with the K5 schools because that school has more grades in common with the K5 group than with the 6 to 8 group. Schools are also grouped by enrollment size, and this is using the Infinite Campus Enrollment Summary Report. And the two size groupings that are listed on the report are just called small and large, but there's no set number or cutoff that constitutes small versus large. So we just kind of have a rule of thumb, and that is if the largest school has 2 times the enrollment of the smallest school, that's going to differentiate between large and small. And so for the schools that fall in between largest and smallest, the district is just going to place those in the size grouping that they deem most appropriate. But you are going to want to make sure that you're being consistent in this. And I do want to note that I think this came up a couple times last year. Your size groupings may be different than the previous year based on changes in enrollment. Now, if we had a lot of kids unenrolled, this school might fit better with the small, and last year it was with the large. So pay attention to that and don't just necessarily copy exactly what you had last year. Our next reminder is to include the correct staff. So the full-time equivalency, or FTE, staff counts need to be for state and locally funded instructional staff members, as well as those who assist or supervise instructional staff members assigned to work at each school. If you have any itinerant staff who work at multiple schools, then those FTEs need to be prorated. So you need to determine the FTE for each school where they work. Now, you're not going to include any non-instructional staff, so our clerical staff, cafeteria workers, janitorial staff, etc. You're also not going to include any FTEs for instructional staff that are paid with any federal funds, not just those paid with Title I, Title II, III, any of the federal funding programs. We're going to leave their FTEs off. And you'll also see within the guide, you'll see a list of staff members who may be excluded on this page. Whether you opt to include or exclude these staff, that is up to you, but please be sure that you are being consistent across all of the schools. You want to reference the GMAP school eligibility page to determine the poverty ranking of schools. In some instances, Title I schools are compared to non-Title I schools. That's where we need to look at high versus low poverty. So in this scenario, as I just said, you're going to look at that page of the GMAP application. And this is the page that when your consultant is reviewing the report, they're going to go and look at that page to kind of check your work and make sure that everything's been grouped accordingly in terms of poverty. If you're comparing Title I to non-Title I, that's a lot more straightforward. And also avoid copying and pasting into the cells of the workbook. This can sometimes impact the functionality of the workbook. I think I shared this last year that the year before I went back and forth with a district. We were both stumped for probably a good hour trying to troubleshoot why their report wasn't showing the schools as comparable. I eventually opened up a fresh workbook and manually entered all the numbers, and all of a sudden they were comparable. It was a copy paste issue. So the best thing I can recommend you do is to go ahead and manually enter that data. Even if you think you've been able to successfully copy and paste in the past, let's just not do it. All right, what do we do if a school isn't comparable? All right, up first, we want to double check your numbers. So make sure that you've counted the correct students and staff. For example, we do not include preschool students in this report, so they need to be excluded from those enrollment counts. Make sure that you didn't include any portion of staff salaries that are paid with federal funds. Maybe look at the list of those staff that you can exclude. Try excluding those from all of the schools. Your next option is to use another date within the window, and you have an entire month to choose from. So it's not unusual for people to have to check multiple dates to find one that works for comparability. If you start working on your report next week, but you can't find a date that works, don't panic. You have the rest of October to try to find something that works. So if you're having trouble, I recommend maybe checking, doesn't have to be every day, but every couple of days and seeing if you've found one that works. Don't change the groupings. Oh, sorry, I forgot to list contacting your KDE consultant for assistance, and using this salary comparison. So if we absolutely cannot find any comparability on any of the days using school student to staff ratio, then we're going to do that salary comparison if we need to. And of course, you can always contact your KDE consultant for assistance. So the don'ts, don't change groupings. You do have to adhere to those grouping requirements that are outlined in that guidebook. Schools with the same grade spans must be grouped together. And as I said earlier, the schools with the overlapping grade spans need to be placed in the group that they have the most grades in common with. And large schools should have roughly double the enrollment of students as compared to small schools. So you just don't want to put anyone in an inaccurate group. And don't change which staff are excluded at various schools. So for example, one of the staff members that you can exclude is an English learner teacher who's paid for like the excess costs of EL staff, or staff paid for excess costs of providing services to children with disabilities. If you count them at one school, you need to count them at all the schools. If you exclude them at one school, you need to exclude them at all the schools. So we've talked about this before. You are required to maintain all of your records pertaining to a federal award for at least 3 years. KDE does recommend retaining those for 5 years, as does the Brewman Group, who many of you are familiar with. They've provided a number of trainings for us. We do talk frequently about program documentation. And you might remember from our statewide federal programs trainings in the past, Brewman has said they strongly recommend 5 years for the documentation. So the things that you're going to want to save to support the information in your comparability report. Number one are those Infinite Campus enrollment summary reports for all of the schools. The date that is listed on those reports must match the date that you enter on the spreadsheet saying this is the date that we calculated comparability. And the enrollment numbers on the reports need to match the numbers on the comparability report. Our best recommendation is to, print off or save a PDF. As soon as you've run those reports and you've found some that work, go ahead and save those. Sometimes when you go back and try to pull those at a later date because there's, some people have enrolled or unenrolled or whatever, those numbers wind up changing a little bit. So it's a lot more straightforward if you save them at that moment. You also want to save the staffing list for the schools. So the lists should clearly document the FTE of state and locally funded instructional staff at each school. If your district is selected for monitoring, KDE staff should be able to easily locate the staffing data that aligns with what's on the comparability report. Sometimes people have things, from their HR department. Of course, every district is different, and those can be a little bit confusing to read. So if you want to make something separate that's a little more straightforward, that works really well. Of course, we don't need any personally identifiable information in that. We don't need people's names or ID numbers, anything like that. We do have, this was, I think, a new resource last year, the Comparability Report Instructional FTE Documentation resource. That is in our sample documents folder on our webpage. This resource has some basic information about comparability and a couple templates for just 2 example methods of documentation. You're not required to use these. These are just kind of some things we've seen before that have worked really well. So let's take a look at the type of staffing documentations that you're going to find, templates that you'll find in that folder. Right, so here's our first one, really straightforward. We've got just the positions listed and then a column for the state and local FTE for those positions and a column for federal FTE. You don't have to include that. I think sometimes people find that useful to make sure that all of the totals add up, but what we're interested in is that state and locally funded. So we see the positions listed here. This allows us to ensure that only the instructional staff or the staff that supervise instructional staff are included. So we've got principal, teachers, coaches, guidance counselor, et cetera. We don't have, like I said, cafeteria workers or clerical staff or anything like that. And we can clearly see the state and local FTE on that. I'm kind of jumping around and now I'm looking at my notes to make sure that I said everything I needed to say. You might want to consider developing a process in your district that includes working with your HR office to kind of take the data from their big master spreadsheet and summarize it using something like this. A written process for comparability isn't required anywhere in the law, but that's definitely something that would help ensure consistency, enable others to complete the comparability report in the event of future staffing changes. It can also just help you from year to year because you only do this once a year. Sometimes it's hard to remember the steps when we only do something every year. If you do have something like that, that's some documentation that you could submit if you're selected for monitoring, just to show some additional internal controls and things that you have in your district. So this other template example has a slightly different format. You can see that we do have the last name and first initial for each staff member, but there's no accompanying information like an employee number, social security, address, anything like that, that then turns this into personally identifiable information. So we've got their last name, their first initial. We've also got their position listed again so that we can make sure that we don't have any non-instructional staff included. We've got our state and local FTE, our federal FTE, and this one has an additional column for staff paid with other non-federal grants. And just like that federal FTE column, this is completely optional. So if this was your district when you're filling out your comparability report for this school, then the number that you're going to put on your comparability report for this school's FTE is going to be 8.15 because that's the FTE for the staff who are paid with state and local funds. All right, so that is all of the information on the comparability report. So if you have any questions about that, if you want to put those in the chat or in the email, let me check the email really quickly. Okay, I don't see anything in the email. So while you're thinking, if you have any questions, our next webinar is going to be on Thursday, October 30th at 10 a.m. Eastern. I always like to remind you that we do want to hear your feedback about the types of information that you want to see in our webinars and newsletters and other resources. So you can always send those directly to us, or if you'd rather submit things anonymously, you can use the survey that's linked here on this slide. I believe we did get some requests recently about maybe more information surrounding some of the policies and procedures that need to exist for students in foster care, as well as our students experiencing homelessness. So that is something that we can definitely work on. All right, we do have a question in the chat. Can we see our report from last year in GMAP as a reference point for a new coordinator? You sure can. And I can pull that up really quickly. My GMAP looks a little bit different than yours, but you should be able to get the idea. So let me stop sharing this presentation and I'll then share that window wherever it went. Okay. So when you go into GMAP, like I said, mine looks a little bit different. But when you get to your list of funding pages, you should have a window here that says fiscal year. And so you can drop down to that fiscal year to find things. Well, let's just put in a district here. So you won't have quite as many steps as this. So let's pretend that I'm Adair County. I'm in my application. I go to my district document library. And then from these root folders, instead of clicking 2026, I'm going to click 2025. Search that, and then I'll go down to my comparability report and just keep expanding all of these little things. So you can see here, this is the report that the district submitted, and then this is the report that the KDE consultant reviewed and approved. So we also upload a copy of that. And when we approve it, we'll also email you a copy to let you know, hey, we've reviewed this, it's approved. We've uploaded the approved version into GMAP. We're also attaching it to this email. So that is where those are located. Okay. Right. I thought we might get this question. So because of our construction, our first day of school is September 3rd. So our 40th instructional day will be at the end of October. Do I still need to have our comparability report in by October 31st? David, what are your thoughts on that?
I would say let's Josh reach out to Aaron, and we'll work on accommodating you around that due date.
Yeah, hopefully you can still do it at the very end of October and it's all going to work out fine. But yeah, we can figure that out if we need to. All right, so I'll do a last check on the email. Don't see any questions there. All right, well, thank you all for joining us this morning and have a great day.